I'm Jen from That Mama Book Nook, and welcome back to my channel. Goodreads Choice Awards first round came out this month. If you aren't familiar with the Goodreads Choice Awards, Goodreads puts out a list of 20 books in a variety of different genres, categories of kind of the best books of the year, and the year being from like mid-November of last year to early November of this year. This year there are 15 different categories, and as I said, 20 books are nominated in each category, and they look at books that are added to lists, books that are rated, how many ratings, how many reviews, really trying to get this overall sense of how popular and well received these books are. Goodreads says that there has to be a 3.50 or higher rating to be considered, and each book can only be nominated in one category, with the exception of audiobook or debut category. Those can have a genre category and also be nominated in that category as well. Then Goodreads members can vote for one book per category, and then it goes through a first round, so then it gets narrowed down to 10, I believe, and then there's a second round, and then there is a winner declared in each of the categories. This year, final winners will be announced on December 5th. Nothing really super special happens if you win. On your, like, the book's Goodreads profile, if it was a nominee or a winner, that will be listed at the top there, and that stays for as long as Goodreads exists, I guess. But it obviously does just get a lot of publicity and excitement and attention drawn to these authors and these books for being a Goodreads Choice Awards nominee, and then again for a winner. In general though, I just find it to be a lot of fun to participate in it, especially in the book community. There's definitely a lot of excitement around this time of year. In many of the categories, there are a lot of books on my TBR that I have added to my ginormous TBR over the course of the year. I actually read the most books in the romance category. I believe I've read 5 of those out of the 20, so still not a ton, but there was, again, a lot that I would like to read. But I've mentioned before that even though I read across all genres, I have a special place in my heart for historical fiction. I was initially going to put a prediction video out of the 20 books that I thought would be nominated for Goodreads Choice Awards, but I didn't quite get to that on time. So I am pivoting, and I'm going to share the 20 nominees that Goodreads has chosen, let you know if it was one I was predicted or not, and then briefly I'll share the ones that I was predicting that weren't nominated as well. I do have my list here that I made before the nominees came out, so you'll just have to trust me, honor policy here, that these were actual predictions. But regardless, it's, again, just a fun time. I have actually only read 2 of the books on the historical fiction nominees, so I'm going to talk about those ones first. The first book was The Women by Kristen Hanna. No surprises there to anyone who likes historical fiction or is even in the book world. I wouldn't be surprised if this one takes it. Very popular, very, very high ratings. This was published on February 6th. At the time of my prediction, it had a 4.63 rating with 780,158 ratings and 86,218 reviews. That is a lot, even for Goodreads. So, way more than any of the other nominees on this list. I believe I read this in either February or March, very soon after it came out, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. For a while, I thought it was even going to be my favorite book I read this year. I think that has since been knocked out, but again, one of my top reads of the year for sure. So this story follows Frankie McGrath in the 1960s during the Vietnam War. She really wants to be known as a hero, just like many of the men in her family. So she enlists in the war as a nurse. She gets pushed into a position as a surgical nurse in definitely like a sink or swim type situation. Starts off very green, but she does definitely rise to the pressure. She becomes very quickly an excellent surgical nurse and spends 2 years in Vietnam, not only saving lives, but also going through a lot of trauma and grief and needing to cope with all those lives that she can't save. When she returns home, she is not met with the hero's welcome that she was hoping for from her family, from her community, or even from the greater public. The news surrounding the Vietnam War has really not been truthful, especially regarding the involvement of women in the war. And that has really skewed the perception of everything that she did there and that she saw. Now Frankie's struggling with being home and has to kind of figure out where she fits. Again, really good. Highly recommend. I had a copy, but I've loaned it out. I love letting people borrow my books who want to read, spreading the book love. So I don't have a copy to share, but I'll pop it up here. And definitely recommend. The next prediction that I guessed correctly for the nominees in historical fiction was Behind Every Good Man by Sarah Goodman Confino. This came out August 6th, 2024. I read an advanced reader copy, so I read this actually mostly in July. At the time of my nominations, this had a 4.37 rating, 10,181 ratings, and 1,068 reviews. I also gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, and I included my full thoughts about this one in my August wrap-up video, which I will link down below if you're curious about. I really, really love this author's writing, so I'm a fan of many of her works, and so I was really excited to see that she was nominated for a Goodreads Choice Awards in historical fiction. This is set in another 60s, 1962, Maryland, DC area. We are following Beverly Diamond. She's a married, stay-at-home mom of 2, typical 1960s housewife. She doesn't work, doesn't have a real advanced education, but she is an excellent mother and an excellent housewife. One day she goes to visit her husband at the office. He works on a senatorial campaign, and she is bringing him a plate of cookies type situation, and she goes in and finds her husband in a very compromising situation with his secretary and some lack of clothes. Beverly immediately kicks him to the curb and is trying to figure out how to survive as a housewife with no education in the 1960s. Her family also has a lot of campaign political experience. So she's been around it her whole life as a child, teenager, and then as an adult being married to someone who also worked in that field. So she decides that she's going to insert herself into the underdogs campaign running against the person who her husband is supporting. The person that she is helping is named Michael Landau. He's not expected to win. She comes in with some fresh ideas, isn't going to take no for an answer to helping out on this campaign. She starts connecting with Michael in more ways than one, but she's putting the campaign first because she really wants to see Michael win, stick it to Larry, and support herself as a strong, independent woman, single mother. Really good, really funny. Recommend this author in this book for sure. So after that, I haven't read any of the other nominees, but I did correctly predict several of them. I predicted first James by Percival Everett. This was published March 19th, 2024. This had a 4.53 rating, 96,352 ratings, and 12,269 reviews. So another one that has a lot on Goodreads and a really high rating as well. This is definitely on my TBR. This is a reimagining of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, told from the enslaved Jim's point of view. which is great. I love that. When Jim hears that he is going to be sold to a man in New Orleans and separated from his wife and daughter, he decides to hide on nearby Jackson Island so that he can make a plan. Meanwhile, Huck Finn has recently faked his own death to escape his violent father, who has recently returned to town. Then we know the story of the raft down the Mississippi River towards the promise of the Free States. Some parts of the stories of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn are still in the story of James, but Jim's intelligence and compassion are shown in a radically new, and I would say necessary, light. So yeah, definitely want to read that one day. Would love to see that one make it to the second round. The next one that I accurately predicted was The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. I recently picked this one up at a library sale, so that was a good score. This was published in July of 2024, and this had a 4.32 rating, 50,029 ratings, and 5,782 reviews. This is also on my TBR, obviously. Washington, D.C., another one. 1950, this one though. Everyone kind of keeps to themselves at the Briar House, which is an all-female boarding house. When the mysterious widow Grace March moves in, she draws out her oddball neighbors into an unlikely friendship. We have poised English beauty Fliss, whose obsession with being a perfect wife and mother is covering up some gaping wounds and trauma. Police officer's daughter Nora, who is entangled with a shadowy gangster. Frustrated baseball star Bee, whose career has ended along with the entire women's baseball league during World War II. And poisonous gung-ho Arlene, who has thrown herself into McCarthy's Red Scare. Grace's weekly attic dinner parties and sun-brewed tea time is the healing balm needed for all of their needs, but Grace actually hides a secret of her own as well. Then there's The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This was also published in July 2024. At the time of my prediction, it had a 4.49 rating, 22,635 ratings, 3,104 reviews, also on my TBR, and have been hearing really good things from my friends who have read it. 1950s Tehran, 7-year-old Ellie lives the life of comfort with her parents until the untimely death of her father. Ellie and her mother are forced to move out of their home into a tinier home downtown. Ellie is desperate for a friend to relieve her of the feeling of isolation. On the first day of school, Ellie meets Homa, who is a very kind girl with a brave spirit. Together, the two girls play games, they learn how to cook, they wander the streets of the colorful Grand Bazaar, and share their ambitions for becoming lion women. Ellie and her mother then end up having the opportunity to move back to their life of comfort, so Ellie and Homa are separated. Now Ellie is a really popular student in one of the best girls' high schools in the area, and her memories of Homa start to fade until one day she reappears in Ellie's life. Together, the two women come of age and pursue their own goals for a meaningful life. But as the political turmoil in Iran escalates, one betrayal will have serious consequences. By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult. This book came out in August of 2024. At the time of my prediction, this had a 4.13 rating, 28,222 ratings, and 4,464 reviews. Also on my TBR, I've been a Jodi Picoult fan for a long time. One of my first favorite authors. This follows Melina Green, who is a playwright in present day, who has just finished writing a play based on her Elizabethan ancestor, Amelia Bassano. But seeing it performed isn't super likely in a industry that the playing field for women is just not level. Melina's kind of waffling whether she risks failure, but her friend decides to take the question off the table and she submits it for Melina under a male pseudonym. Then we also get a second timeline POV in 1581 of Amelia Bassano. Her lessons on languages, history, and writing have gifted her with a great storytelling and writing ability, but like most women of her day, she is not allowed a voice. She is forced to become a mistress of Lord Chamberlain, who oversees theater productions, and Amelia gets to see firsthand how theater can really move an audience. She begins to formulate a plan on how to bring one of her own plays to the stage by paying an actor named William Shakespeare to front her work. The next book that I predicted is Husbands and Lovers by Beatrice Williams. This was published June 2024. This, at the time of my prediction, had a 4.16 rating, 33,554 ratings, and 4,159 reviews. It is on my TBR as well. New England, 2022, single mother Mallory Dunn gets the call every parent absolutely dreads getting from her son's summer camp that Sam, her son, is being basically life flighted because he is suffering some toxic effects from eating a toxic death cap mushroom. He is now fighting for his life and in need of a donor kidney. Mallory, with the need for a kidney, Mallory is now forced to confront two harrowing secrets from her past: her mother's adoption from an Irish orphanage in 1952, and her own all-consuming summer romance from 14 years ago with her best friend, Monk Adams, who is now one of the world's most famous singer-songwriters, and it was an act of betrayal that kind of halted that relationship. This also has a second timeline POV taking place in Cairo in 1951. That timeline follows Hungarian refugee Hannah Ainsworth. After suffering tragedy beyond comprehension during the war, she is now kind of trying to pick her life back up and make a new life for herself. She's married to wealthy British diplomat, but an encounter with a hotel manager, a hotel that is bristling with spies, leads to a passionate affair that kind of reawakens Hannah's longing for the life that she used to have. As revolution simmers in the Egyptian streets, and now pregnant Hannah finds herself snared in a game of intrigue between two men and an act of sacrifice that will echo down generations. The next book is Shelterwood by Lisa Wingate. This was published in June of 2024, and at the time of my prediction, it had a 3.86 rating, 16,769 ratings, and 2,368 reviews. This is on my TBR. 1909, Oklahoma. 11-year-old Olive Augusta knows that her stepfather does not have good intentions towards the two Choctaw girls that are boarded in their home as wards. When the older girl disappears, Ollie flees to the woods, taking the 6-year-old Nessa with her. Together, they begin a perilous journey on the Winding Stair Mountains, which is a notorious territory of outlaws, treasure hunters, and desperate men. Along the way, Ollie and Nessa form unlikely bonds with others like themselves who are just kind of trying to survive and stay one step ahead of these people that are trying to exploit them or worse. Then we fast forward to Oklahoma 1990. Law enforcement ranger Valerie arrives at Horse Thief Trailer National Park seeking a quiet place to balance her career and single parenthood. No sooner has she arrived, she is faced with a local controversy. There is controversy over the park's opening. A teenage girl hiker has gone missing, and a long abandoned burial site of 3 children deep in a cave has been discovered. Val's quest to uncover the truth wins an ally in the neighboring Choctaw tribal police, but soon collides with old secrets and the tragic and deadly history of the land itself. The next book that I did accurately predict is The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James. This was published in January of 2024. At the time of my prediction, it had a 3.79 rating, 9,242 ratings, and 1,717 reviews. This is the first one that's not on my TBR. I have seen the book around. I'm not necessarily surprised to see it nominated, but the synopsis wasn't quite grabbing me. However, never say never. I'm up for anything. So if it came up, if I heard something that intrigued me, I could definitely still pick it up. But at this time, it's not on my TBR. And that goes for any book that I talk about coming up that is not on my TBR yet. 1895, Antonio Sonoro is in a long line of ruthless men. He's good with a gun, and he is often looking for trouble, but he is out of money and out of options. A drought has ravaged the town of Dorado, Mexico, where he lives with his wife and children. And so when he hears that there is a train coming through filled with gold and treasures, he sets off to Houston to rob it. And he brings along his younger brother Hugo with him. But when the heist goes awry and his younger brother Hugo is killed by Texas Rangers, he finds himself launched into a quest of revenge that puts himself and his wife and children and family in danger. Fast forward a little bit, 1964, Jamie Sonoro is a well-renowned singer in Mexico, but his comfortable life is kind of disrupted when he comes across a family book that purports to tell the entire history of his family, starting all the way back to Cain and Abel. In these pages, Jamie discovers all these horrific crimes that is committed by members of his ancestry. And when the same mysterious figure from Antonio's timeline shows up in Jamie's, Jamie realizes he may have to be the one to pay for his ancestors' crimes, unless he can discover the true history of his grandfather, Antonio Sonoro, aka the Bullet Swallower. The next book is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Lalif Shafak, published in August of 2024. I accurately predicted this one. It had a 4.50 rating, 6,616 ratings, and 1,333 reviews. This is not on my TBR yet, but I would consider adding. In the ancient city of Nineveh, on the bank of the river Tigris, a ruthless king of Mesopotamia built a great library that would crumble with the end of his reign. From its ruins, however, emerged a great poem that would infuse the existence of two rivers that would bind the lives of three individuals. In 1840 London, Arthur is born beside the stinking sewage-filled River Thames. As he grows up, he has an abusive alcoholic father and a mentally ill mother, and the only chance of escaping is with his brilliant memory. When his gift earns him a spot at a publishing company, his world is open up beyond his dreams. But one book in particular that he comes across is really interesting to him, and that is Nineveh and Its Remains. 2014 Turkey, we have Naren, who is a 10-year-old Yazidi girl who has a rare condition that is going to cause her to eventually become deaf. Before that happens, her grandmother is determined to have her baptized in a sacred Iraqi temple. But with the rising presence of ISIS and the destruction of the family's ancestral lands along the Tigris, they are running out of time. And then 2018 London, the newly divorced Zalika, a hydrologist, moves into a houseboat along the Thames to escape her husband. Orphaned and raised by her wealthy uncle, Zalika has decided that she is going to take her own life in 1 month until she comes across a curious book about her home life that changes everything. The last book on my 20 book list that I accurately predicted was The Great Divide by Cristina Henriquez. This was published in March of 2024. At the time of my prediction, it had a 3.68 rating, 15,533 ratings, and 2,115 reviews. This is not on my TBR, but again, it was still on my radar for Goodreads. It said that the canal will be the greatest engineering feat in history, but first it must be built. For Francisco, who is a local fisherman who is resisting the foreign powers who are clamoring to change and take part of his country, he is disappointed that his son Omar has decided to work as a digger in the excavation zone. But for Omar, whose life and upbringing has kind of been lonely and isolating, this project is a chance for a connection. Ada Bunting is a bold 16-year-old stowaway from Barbados who sneaks into Panama along with a lot of the other West Indians in search for work. Alone and with no money, she's determined to find a job to be able to pay for her ailing sister's surgery. When she sees a young man, Omar, collapse after a grueling day of work, she is the only one that rushes to his aid. Then we get John Oswald, who has dedicated his life to scientific research and has journeyed to Panama with one goal in mind, and that is to eliminate malaria. But now his wife Marion has fallen ill herself, so when he witnesses Ada's bravery and compassion, he hires her on the spot as a caregiver for his wife. This fateful decision sets in motion a tale of ambition, loyalty, and sacrifice. So then in my predictions, so I had like my 20, and then I did have a few alternates that I was like, I could see these being nominated. So I did get one alternate right that did end up being on the top 20, and that was The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan, and that was published in January of 2024. This had a 3.87 rating, 16,287 ratings, and 2,261 reviews. This is not on my TBR at the moment. Malaya, 1945, Cecily Alcantraz's family is in danger. Her 15-year-old son Abel is missing. Her youngest daughter Jasmine is being confined to the basement to avoid being pressed into service at the comfort stations. And her eldest daughter Jujubee works at a tea house that is frequented by drunken Japanese soldiers, is just getting angrier by the day. Cecily knows two things. One, that it's all her fault, and two, that her family can never know that. A decade earlier, Cecily had been desperate to be more than a low-level housewife to a bureaucrat. A chance meeting with the charismatic General Fujiwara led her into this life of espionage, pursuing dreams of an Asia for Asians. Instead, Cecily ended up helping to usher in an even more brutal occupation by the Japanese. 10 years later, as the war is kind of reaching its apex, Cecily is kind of confronted with the truth. Now her family is on the brink of destruction, and she will do whatever she can to save them. So in total, I have accurately predicted 11, kind of 12 with the alternate. 12 out of 20, that's not too bad, I think. I'll take it. Now I'm going to go through the last 8 books that I did not predict but were nominated. So the first book is Anita DeMonte Laughs Last by Xochitl Gonzalez. This was published in March of 2024. This has a 3.81 rating, 29,551 ratings, and 3,760 reviews. This one is on my TBR, so you would have thought I would have predicted it, but I thought it was more mystery literary fiction, so I thought it would be in a different category. This one also says it takes place in 1985 and then 1995, so while technically it is a historical fiction, as someone who was born in the late 80s and lived in the early 90s, I sometimes have a hard time thinking of that time period as historical. Come on. Anyway, Anita DeMonte, who is a rising star in the art world, is found dead in New York City. Her tragic death is the talk of the town, until it isn't. By 1998, Anita's name has all but been forgotten. Certainly by the time that Raquel, a third-year art history student, is presenting her thesis. On College Hill, surrounded by privileged students whose futures are already paved for them, Raquel feels like an outsider. Students of color like her are minority and it is no secret that they have to work twice as hard for the same opportunities. But when Raquel finds herself romantically involved with a well-connected older art student, she finds herself rising in the social ranks. As she struggles to straddle both worlds, she comes across Anita's story, raising questions about the dynamics of her own relationship, which eerily mirrors that of the Forgotten Artist. The next one I did not predict was the Paris novel by Ruth Reichel. This was published in April of 2024. This has a 3.81 rating, 26,451 ratings, and 3,004 reviews. This is not on my TBR, and to be honest, I haven't heard the greatest reviews from some of my book friends. When Stella's arranged mother dies, Stella is left with a one-way ticket and a note that says, "Go to Paris." Stella is hardly cut out for adventure. A traumatic childhood has left her really confined to her routines and places that make her feel safe and comfortable. When her boss encourages her to take the time off, Stella does resign herself to fulfilling her mother's last wish. Alone in a foreign city, Stella finds herself falling into old habits with being very frugal and, not going too adventurous outside the box. Then one day she stumbles into a vintage shop and tries on a fabulous Dior dress. The shop owner convinces Stella that dress was made for her, and for the first time in her life, really, she does something impulsive. She buys the dress, and together she and the dress go off on an adventure on the streets of Paris. As weeks and many decadent meals go by, Stella ends up living as a tumbleweed in a local bookstore Shakespearean company. She uncovers a 100-year-old mystery in a Monet painting and discovers a passion for food that may actually be connected to her past. The next book that I did not predict was Long Island by Colm Toibin. This was published in May of 2024. This had a 3.78 rating, 41,512 ratings, and 4,602 reviews. This is one that has not been on my radar at all. Some of the ones I just talked about, I've heard, I've seen around, I just didn't necessarily predict them. This one I've never heard of, never seen. It's also the second book in a series, so I'm not sure if that's why it hasn't stood out to me, because I'm not familiar with the first book in the series either. Alice Lacey is Irish, and she is married to Tony Fiorello, who is one of 4 Italian-American brothers living in a Long Island. And they all kind of live together in neighboring houses in a cul-de-sac with their wives and their children and Tony's parents. So it's a huge extended family that lives, works, plays, eats, does everything together. So now it's spring 1976. Alice is now in her 40s with 2 teenage children and really no one to rely on in a country that still feels really new to her. She hasn't been back to Ireland in decades, but honestly the ties there still feel stronger than the ones to America. One day when Tony is at his job, Alice is in her home office doing some accounting. An Irish man comes to the door asking for Alice by name. He tells her that his wife is pregnant with Tony's child and that when the baby is born, he will not raise it, but instead he plans to deposit it on Alice's doorstep. It is what Alice does and what she refuses to do in response to this stunning news that makes the novel so riveting. Then the next book is The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern by Linda Cohen Leugman. This was published in October of 2024, so one of the newer ones. This had a 4.15 rating, 6,922 ratings, and 1,508 reviews. This actually is also on my TBR, but this is another one that I thought would lean towards a different category. I thought it would be maybe more fantasy. It has some magical realism components that I thought would put it in that category. But I maybe should have not thought that, because Wayward, which also is kind of very different stories but similar in some ways, where it kind of toes the line of magical realism, won the historical fiction award last year for Goodreads. So not a total surprise if I had thought a little bit deeper about it. On the cusp of turning 80, newly retired pharmacist Augusta Stern is adrift. When she relocates to an active senior living community in southern Florida, she happens to have an encounter with Irving Rivkin, who was the delivery boy at her father's old pharmacy, and the man who broke her heart 60 years earlier. As a teenager growing up in 1920s Brooklyn, Augusta's father was her role model. Solomon Stern, her father, was the trusted owner of the local pharmacy and the neighborhood expert on every ailment. But when Augusta's mother dies and great aunt Esther moves in, Augusta can't help but be drawn to Esther's curious methods. As a healer herself, Esther offers Solomon's customers her own advice. Unconventional remedies ranging from homemade chicken soup to a mysterious array of powders and potions. As Augusta prepares to go to college herself, she is torn between loyalty to her father and fascination with her great aunt, all while navigating a budding but complicated relationship with Irving. Desperate for clarity, she impulsively uses Esther's most potent elixir with disastrous consequences. Disillusioned and alone, Augusta vows to reject Esther's enchantments forever. The next book, I actually even have it physically on my shelf, and that is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. This was published in early December of 2024. This has a 4.42 rating, 172,561 ratings, and 18,854 reviews. This one is obviously on my TBR. 100% should have been on my predictions, but I think when I was doing a little history about which historical fiction books would be on Goodreads Choice Awards, because this one was technically last year, even though it obviously does make the cutoff for Goodreads, it was a little trickier for me to find, and I think that I just would have assumed that it was on last year's Choice Awards. But no, it's on this one, so that was a goof on my part. Anyway, Maine, 1789. When the Kennebec River freezes, entombing a man in the ice, Martha Ballard is called to examine the body and determine the cause of death. As a midwife and a healer, she is privy to a lot of information of what goes on behind closed doors in Hallowell. Her diary is a record of every birth, death, mystery, crime, debacle that unfolds in this close-knit community. Months earlier, Martha documented the details of an alleged rape by two men who are two of the town's most respected gentlemen, one who has now been found dead in the ice. But when a local physician undermines her conclusion regarding the death, declaring the death to be an accident, Martha is forced to investigate the shocking murder on her own. Over the course of one winter, as the trial nears and whispers and prejudices mount, Martha doggedly pursues the truth. Her diary soon lands at the center of the scandal, implicating those she loves and compelling Martha to decide where her loyalties lie. The next book that I did not predict was The Book Lover's Library by Madeline Martin, published in September of 2024. This had a 4.09 rating, 3,705 ratings, and only 739 reviews. This is on my TBR. In Nottingham, England, widow Emma Taylor finds herself in a desperate position to be able to provide for herself and her daughter Olivia. But with legal restrictions prohibiting widows with children from most employment opportunities, she is left with only one option, and that is persuading the manageress of Books Lovers Library to take a chance on her. When the threat of war becomes a reality, Olivia, the daughter, is moved to the countryside and separated from Emma. In her daughter's absence, Emma really bonds and makes some unlikely friendships with her coworkers and her neighbors, as well as the recommendations that she provides to the quirky library regulars. But the job doesn't come without its difficulties. Books are mysteriously misshelved and disappearing, and her work forces her to confront her memories of her late father and the bookstore that they shared together. As the Blitz intensifies in England and Emma fights to reunite with her daughter, she must learn to depend on her community and the power of literature more than ever to find hope in the darkest times. The Seventh Veil of Salome by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This was published in August of 2024. This has a 3.81 rating, 5,270 ratings, and 1,187 reviews. This is not on my TBR at this time. 1950s Hollywood. Every actress wants to play the part of Salome, the star-making role in a big budget film about the legendary woman who has inspired artists since ancient times. So when the film's director ends up casting Vera Larios, an unknown Mexican ingenue, in the lead role, she quickly becomes the talk of the town. Vera also quickly becomes kind of a target for people who are envious, including Nancy Hartley, whose career has kind of stalled and will do anything to win the fame that she believes she so richly deserves. But this is actually the tale of three women. Not only is it about Vera and Nancy, but also about Salome. Consumed with the desire for a fiery prophet who foretells the doom of her stepfather, she is a woman who is torn between the decree of duty and the yearning of her heart. And then the last book that is nominated for a Goodreads Choice Awards in the category of historical fiction is The Phoenix Crown, which is also by Kate Quinn and Jeannie Chang. This was published in February of 2024. This has a 3.82 rating with 26,279 ratings and 2,856 reviews. This one wasn't on my TBR, but since learning about it through the Goodreads Choice Awards, I have since added it. So that's a perfect example of what I talked about all the way at the beginning of this video, that, you know, it does bring more awareness of these books to people who may have missed it in their book journey, or, you know, just in general, just bringing more attention to them. So this takes place in San Francisco in 1906. A city bustling with newly minted millionaires and scheming upstarts. Two very different women are hoping to change their fortunes. Gemma, a golden hair, silver voiced soprano whose career desperately needs a rekindling, and Su Ling, a petite and resolute Chinatown embroideress who is determined to escape an arranged marriage. Their paths cross when they are both drawn into the orbit of Henry Thornton, a charming railroad magnate. His extraordinary collection of Chinese artifacts and antiques, including the fabled Phoenix Crown, which is a legendary relic of Beijing's fallen summer palace. His patronage offers Gemma and Su Ling the chance of a lifetime, but their lives are thrown into turmoil when a devastating earthquake rips through San Francisco and Thornton disappears, along with the Phoenix Crown. This leaves behind a mystery reaching further than anyone could have imagined, until 5 years later when the Phoenix Crown reappears. And it reappears at a sumptuous Paris costume ball. This draws Gemma and Su Ling together in one last desperate quest for justice. So there you have it. Those are the 20 nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the category of historical fiction. I did briefly just want to mention that I also predicted a few other books in the historical fiction category that ended up being nominated but in a different category. I'm not going to go into the whole synopses. This video is long enough, but just super briefly, I predicted The Foxwife by Yangtze Chu, A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang, and Wandering Stars by Tommy Oren. The first two ended up in the romantasy category. Wandering Stars ended up going into the general fiction category. In my alternates, I also guessed The God of the Woods, but I purposely put it in the alternates because I figured it would go into the mystery thriller category, and it did. But this technically takes place in the 80s, so I thought there was a slight chance it could go in historical fiction, so I just noted it. Then in my alternates, I also put in All We Were Promised by Ashton Lattimore, and this ended up being put into the debut category. And then again, I won't go through the synopses of these, but I wanted to mention the few books that I thought would be nominated and weren't on the Goodreads Choice Awards at all. Those were Becoming Madam Secretary by Stephanie Dray. This was published in March of 2024. This has a 4.45 rating with 7,947 ratings and 1,102 reviews. The Outlaw Noble Salt by Amy Harmon. This was published in April of 2024 with a 4.44 rating, 8,111 ratings, 1,472 reviews. I actually read that one as an advanced reader copy and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I guessed The Wartime Book Club by Kate Thompson. This was published in April 2024 with a 4.31 rating, 2,428 ratings, and 432 reviews. I read that one and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I also guessed The Berlin Letters by Catherine Ray. This was published March 2024, 4.20 rating, 4,790 ratings, 952 reviews. I guessed Table for Two by Amor Towles. This was published April 2024 with a 4.24 rating, 38,009 ratings, 4,480 reviews. And the last one that I guessed was The Mayor of Maxwell Street by Avery Cunningham. This was published January 2024 with a 3.56 rating, 6,110 ratings, and 915 reviews. Now I wish that I had time to read and vlog what I see some other booktubers doing, and that is to read through all of the books in one category or read one book from every category, but that is totally not realistic for me. I've only read 2 of the books in the historical fiction category, so I do not have time to read 18 books between now and when the winner's announced. And like if one from every category would be, the 15 categories. Those do seem super fun to do. I will consider that for a future year. But instead, this year I decided I would have my Instagram followers vote on which book from the historical fiction category that I have not read that I would read and vlog. So they are going to be picking one book that I will be reading from this category, and I will vlog about it. So that's actually already happened. So if you follow me on Instagram, you already know which book that is. If you don't, you will find out very soon. And then also just stay tuned and see which of those 20 books that I talked about are going to make it in the top 10. All right, quick interrupting this video just to give a little update. I took a really long time to edit and I was just procrastinating getting this video out there. So the Goodreads Choice Awards are still going on, but we are onto our second round. So I talked about the top 20, but it's actually down to the top 10. So the books that made it to the top 10 that I just talked about were The Women by Kristen Hanna. Again, no surprise, I'm predicting this will actually be the winner. I read this one. The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This one is on my TBR. The Frozen River by Ariel Lahan. This is also on my TBR. The Book Lover's Library by Madeline Martin. This is also on my TBR. The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, on my TBR. By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult, also on my TBR. Husbands and Lovers by Beatrice Williams, on my TBR. James by Percival Everett, also on my TBR. They don't really do places, but this would be the one that I would guess would be in second place. Anita Demonte, Laughs Last by Xochitl Gonzalez. This is also on my TBR. And then lastly, The Seventh Veil of Salome by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is the only one that is not on my TBR, but now I feel like I'm gonna have to take yet another look at it since all the other top 10 are either read or on my TBR. Also, I want to give like a little hint that I mentioned that I will be reading one of the books from the historical fiction that were picked by my Bookstagram followers, and they had picked that book way back when they first came out, but that book did make it to the top 10 as well. So one of these books is the book that I will be reading and vlogging. All right,
back to the original video.
I would love to know if you've read any of the books that I talked about today, and if so, what did you think? And if you are still here in this very long video, but you're not feeling super chatty, go ahead and leave me a trophy emoji for the awards, and I will see you on my next video. Bye!